The first blow sent the old man sprawling into the mud. Alara froze at the edge of the market square, her basket of herbs clutched against her chest. The crowd around her shifted and murmured, but no one moved to help. No one ever did when the palace guards were involved. "I said move along, beggar." The guard's voice was sharp with contempt. He stood over the fallen figure, his polished boots inches from the man's face. "You're not welcome in the Alpha King's market." The beggar tried to rise. His clothes were torn and filthy, his dark hair matted and hanging over his face. One of his legs seemed twisted beneath him, and he moved with painful slowness. Alara's heart clenched at the sight. He was injured, starving probably, and completely alone. The second guard laughed and kicked dirt toward him. "Look at him! Can't even stand properly. What kind of wolf can't walk straight?" Shame burned through Alara, though she wasn't the one being humiliated. She knew that feeling too well. The years of being called defective, worthless, the whispers that followed her everywhere since her family had died and left her with nothing but a position in the healer's cottage and a wolf that refused to shift. The beggar finally made it to his knees. His head was still bowed, his face hidden. But his hands, Alara noticed, were pressed flat against the ground, not shaking, not trembling with fear or weakness, just still, perfectly, unnaturally still. Something about that made her pause. "Perhaps we should teach him a lesson about where cripples belong," the first guard said. He reached for the club at his belt. "The Alpha King has no tolerance for weakness in his kingdom." The crowd began to disperse. Mothers pulled children away. Merchants suddenly found their stalls fascinating. Alara watched them go, one by one, and felt something hot and angry rise in her chest. This was wrong. This was cruel. And everyone was just going to let it happen because they were afraid. She was afraid too. But fear had never stopped her before. Before she could think better of it, Alara stepped forward. Her legs trembled, but she forced herself to move until she stood between the guards and the fallen beggar. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Stop!" Her voice came out quieter than she intended. She swallowed and tried again. "Please, he's done nothing wrong." The guards stared at her. The first one, the cruel one, let out a disbelieving laugh. "And who exactly are you?" "No one important." That at least was true. "But he's hurt, and alone. Surely the Alpha King's guards have better things to do than beat a man who can't even defend himself." "You dare lecture us?" The guard stepped closer, and Alara forced herself not to back away. His eyes were cold. "Do you know what we do to people who interfere with the king's justice?" "This isn't justice." The words slipped out before she could stop them. "This is cruelty, and if the Alpha King truly ordered his guards to beat helpless beggars in the street, then perhaps he isn't the ruler the stories say he is." Silence fell over the square. Alara's blood went cold as she realized what she'd just said. Criticizing the Alpha King, to his own guards, in public. She had just signed her own death warrant. The guard's hand closed around her arm, his grip bruising. "You'll regret those words, girl. The dungeons have a special place for traitors who—" "Release her!" The voice came from behind her, low, quiet, and carrying an authority that made every wolf in the square go still. Alara turned. The beggar had risen to his feet. He stood straight now, his twisted legs somehow bearing his weight perfectly. His matted hair had fallen back from his face, revealing features that were sharp and aristocratic beneath the grime. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes, dark gold eyes that blazed with barely contained power. The guards released her instantly. They stumbled backward, their faces draining of color. Your Majesty," the cruel one stammered. We had no idea." The beggar who was not a beggar stepped forward. His presence filled the square, heavy and commanding. When he spoke again, his voice was soft as silk and twice as dangerous. You had no idea that your king walks among his people, that he watches, that he tests the hearts of those who serve him." His golden gaze swept over the guards, then the scattered crowd, and finally came to rest on Alara. "And now I know exactly what kind of wolves fill my kingdom." Alara couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stare at the man before her as the truth crashed over her like a wave. She hadn't saved a beggar. She had just defended the Alpha King himself. And from the way he was looking at her, with curiosity and something that might have been admiration, her life was about to change forever. The Alpha King's gaze held her pinned in place. Ilara's mind raced through everything she knew about him, the stories, the rumors, the whispered fears. King Caden Blackwood, the Wolf of Iron. They said he had torn his own brother's throat out to claim the throne. They said he trusted no one and killed anyone who dared to cross him. They said his heart was as cold as the northern mountains, and she had just called him a poor ruler. To his face, "Your Majesty." The words scraped past her dry throat. She dropped into a curtsy so deep her knees nearly touched the muddy ground. "Forgive me. I didn't know. I never would have—" Never would have what? His voice was closer now. She could see his boots in her line of vision, no longer the worn leather of a beggar, but somehow still the same. "Defended me. Spoken against cruelty. Told the truth?" Ilara didn't know how to answer. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and she kept her eyes fixed on the ground. If she looked up, she might see her death written in those golden eyes. She had heard what happened to those who insulted the king, the dungeons, the executioner's block, or worse, being torn apart by his wolf in front of the entire court. "Rise." The command was quiet, but absolute. Ilara forced her trembling legs to obey. When she finally lifted her gaze to meet his, she found him studying her with an expression she couldn't read. This close, she could see the sharp intelligence in his eyes, the controlled power in every line of his body. He was taller than she had realized, broader. Even beneath the beggar's rags, he radiated authority. "What is your name?" he asked. "Ilara, Your Majesty. Ilara Vane." "And what do you do, Ilara Vane, when you are not rescuing beggars from my guards?" There was something in his tone that might have been amusement or mockery. Ilara couldn't tell which, and that terrified her almost as much as his reputation. She clasped her hands together to stop them from shaking and forced herself to answer steadily. "I work for the healer in the lower village. I gather herbs, mix poultices, tend to the sick when Mistress Helene allows it." She swallowed. "I'm no one of importance, Your Majesty. Just a servant. A servant who speaks against the king's guards." He tilted his head, and a strand of dark hair fell across his forehead. Even dirty and disguised, he was devastatingly handsome. The kind of handsome that made Ilara's chest tight in a way she didn't understand. That takes either great courage or great foolishness. "Probably both," she admitted before she could stop herself. Something flickered in his expression, not anger, not quite a smile either, but his eyes warmed by a single degree, and Ilara felt a strange flutter in her stomach. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching horses. A group of riders thundered into the square, their armor gleaming, their wolves massive and silver gray. The palace guard. The real palace guard, not the petty market sentries who had beaten him. They surrounded their king in an instant, forming a protective wall between him and the crowd. "Your Majesty." The leader of the riders dismounted and knelt. His voice was tight with barely contained fury. "When you did not return, we feared the worst. This disguise of yours served its purpose, Commander Graves." The king's voice was calm, but Ilara caught the edge of irritation beneath it. "I learned what I needed to learn." Commander Graves rose, and his cold gaze swept over the trembling market guards, the scattered crowd, and finally landed on Ilara. His eyes narrowed. She felt the weight of his assessment like a physical thing: her patched dress, her worn shoes, her unremarkable face. He dismissed her in an instant. "We should return to the palace," he said. "The council awaits." Indeed. The king turned, and for a moment Alara thought he would simply leave, walk away and forget her entirely. She would go back to her herbs and her poultices and her quiet, invisible life, and this would become nothing more than a strange story to tell herself on lonely nights. But then he stopped. He looked back over his shoulder, those golden eyes finding hers with unsettling precision. "The girl comes with us." Alara's heart stopped. The commander's expression flickered with surprise, then smoothed into professional blankness. "Your Majesty?" "You heard me." The king's gaze never left Alara's face. She showed more courage and more honor than any wolf in this square. "I would have her at the palace." "As what, Your Majesty?" The question hung in the air. Alara watched the king's lips curve into something that was not quite a smile. It was sharp, calculating, and it sent a shiver down her spine. "As my personal healer," he said, "I find myself in need of someone I can trust. And trust, as we have seen today, is in very short supply." Before Alara could protest, before she could explain that she was barely trained, that she had no business in a palace, that she couldn't even shift like a proper wolf, two guards flanked her. Their grip was firm, but not cruel as they guided her toward a waiting horse. The king was already mounted. He sat tall in the saddle, every inch the ruler despite his beggar's rags. When he looked down at her, his expression was unreadable. "Do not look so frightened, Alara Vane," he said quietly. "You saved my life today. The least I can do is change yours." The horse began to move. The palace rose in the distance, vast and imposing against the gray sky. And Alara realized, with a mix of terror and something dangerously close to hope, that nothing would ever be the same again. The palace was even more overwhelming up close. Alara stood in the entrance hall, her muddy shoes leaving prints on marble floors that probably cost more than everything she had ever owned. Towering columns rose toward a ceiling painted with wolves and moons and stars. Servants in crisp uniforms moved through the corridors with practiced efficiency, their gazes sliding over her like she was a stain someone had forgotten to clean. She had never felt more out of place in her life. The king had disappeared the moment they arrived, swept away by advisors and guards and important-looking wolves in fine clothing. He hadn't looked back at her, hadn't explained what she was supposed to do or where she was supposed to go. One moment he was there, golden eyes meeting hers with that unreadable intensity. The next, he was gone, and Alara was alone in a palace full of strangers who clearly wished she had stayed in the mud where she belonged. "So you're the little street rat the king dragged in." The voice came from behind her. Alara turned to find a tall woman with silver hair pulled back in a severe knot. Her dress was simple but expensive, and her eyes were the color of winter ice. Everything about her radiated authority and disapproval. She looked at Alara the way one might look at a dead mouse the cat had dropped on the doorstep. "I'm Alara," she managed. "Alara Vane. The king brought me here to be his—" "I know what you're here for." The woman's lip curled slightly. "I am Mistress Thorne, head of the household staff. Whatever the king's reasons for plucking you from obscurity, you are now my responsibility, and I do not tolerate incompetence." Alara's cheeks burned, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm a healer, or training to be one. I know herbs and medicines. I can help. You can help." Mistress Thorne repeated the words like they were a particularly unfunny joke. "The palace has 3 fully trained healers, girl. Wolves who have studied for decades, who have served royalty since before you were born." She stepped closer, and Alara caught the sharp scent of her disapproval. What could you possibly offer that they cannot? Nothing. The answer sat heavy in Alara's chest. She had no credentials, no training beyond what Mistress Helene had allowed her to learn between scrubbing floors and fetching water. She was nobody, and Mistress Thorne knew it. But she had not survived this long by crumbling under cruelty. "The king chose me," Elara said quietly. "I don't know why, but until he tells me otherwise, I'll do whatever work needs doing. I'm not afraid of hard tasks." Something flickered in Mistress Thorne's cold eyes. Not warmth, exactly, but perhaps a grudging acknowledgement that Elara had a spine beneath her patched dress and tangled hair. "We shall see." She turned sharply. "Follow me. I'll show you to your quarters, and for the sake of all that is holy, try not to touch anything valuable." The room they gave her was small but clean, a narrow bed with white linens, a wooden wardrobe, a window that looked out over the palace gardens, where roses bloomed in colors Elara had never seen before. It was the nicest space she had ever called her own, and she stood in the doorway for a long moment, afraid that if she stepped inside, someone would realize the mistake and throw her out. Mistress Thorne left without another word. Elara sat on the edge of the bed and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. This morning she had been gathering herbs in the forest. Now she was in the Alpha King's palace, surrounded by wolves who hated her, with a title she hadn't earned and a future she couldn't begin to imagine. A knock at the door made her jump. She opened it to find a young servant girl with freckles and nervous eyes. The girl thrust a bundle of fabric into Elara's arms without meeting her gaze. "New clothes," she said quickly. "Mistress Thorne's orders, and—" She hesitated, glancing down the corridor as if afraid of being overheard. "The king has summoned you. To his private chambers. Immediately." Elara's stomach dropped. "Now? But I just arrived. I haven't even—" "Immediately," the girl repeated. She was already backing away. "Down the east corridor, third door on the left. Don't keep him waiting. He doesn't like to be kept waiting." Then she was gone, leaving Elara alone with a pile of unfamiliar clothes and a summons she couldn't refuse. Her hands trembled as she changed into the new dress. It was simple but well made, deep green fabric that fit her better than anything she had ever worn. She caught a glimpse of herself in the small mirror above the wash basin. The same face stared back at her. Tired eyes, two sharp cheekbones, the kind of features that people looked past rather than at. But something had changed. There was a spark there that hadn't existed this morning. Fear, yes, but also something else. Determination, maybe, or just the stubbornness to see this through. She smoothed her hands over the unfamiliar fabric, took a deep breath, and walked out the door. The east corridor was quiet. Her footsteps echoed against the stone as she counted doors. First, second, third. She stopped outside a heavy oak door carved with wolves and raised her hand to knock. Before her knuckles could touch the wood, the door swung open. The king stood in the doorway. He had bathed and changed since the market square. His dark hair was clean now, falling in waves around a face that was sharp and handsome and unsettling in its intensity. He wore a simple black shirt, open at the collar, and his golden eyes fixed on her with that same unreadable expression. "You came," he said. "You summoned me." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "Did I have a choice?" His lips twitched, almost a smile. "No, I suppose you didn't." He stepped aside to let her enter, and Elara walked into the Alpha King's private chambers, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. The king's chambers were nothing like she expected. She had imagined cold grandeur, weapons on the walls, trophies of conquered enemies, the kind of aggressive display that matched his fearsome reputation. Instead, she found warmth. A fire crackled in a massive stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across walls lined with bookshelves. Soft rugs covered the floor. A large desk sat near the window, buried under papers and maps. It looked less like the lair of a monster and more like the sanctuary of a man who spent his nights reading instead of sleeping. You seem surprised. The king closed the door behind her, and Alara heard the soft click of the lock. Her pulse jumped, but his voice remained calm. Did you expect chains and bloodstains? I didn't know what to expect. She forced herself to turn and face him. Everyone in the kingdom has heard stories about you. Ah, yes, the stories. He moved past her toward a small table near the fire, where a decanter of wine sat beside two glasses. His movements were fluid and controlled, but Alara noticed something she hadn't seen before. A slight tension in his shoulders. A careful way of holding himself, as if bracing against invisible pain. The wolf of iron. The king who killed his own brother. The monster who trusts no one and loves nothing. Are they true? The question slipped out before she could stop it. The king paused, his hand on the decanter. For a long moment he didn't move. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. Some of them. He poured wine into both glasses and held one out to her. Alara hesitated, then crossed the room to take it. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and she felt a strange warmth spread up her arm. The king's eyes flickered to hers, something unreadable passing through them. Then he turned away and lowered himself into one of the chairs by the fire with a carefully controlled exhale. That was when she saw it, the wince he tried to hide, the way his hand pressed briefly against his side before dropping to the armrest. "You're hurt," she said. "It's nothing." "You're lying." The words came out sharper than she intended. She set down her wineglass and moved toward him, her healer's instincts overriding her fear. "In the market square, when you were pretending to be injured, something happened. One of the guards kicked you. I saw it, but I thought, you thought I was faking all of it." His golden eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his careful mask. Exhaustion, pain, vulnerability he couldn't quite hide. "I was, mostly, but Guardsman Hendricks has heavier boots than he realizes." "Let me see." It wasn't a request. Alara wasn't sure where the boldness came from, but she was already kneeling beside his chair, her hands reaching for the hem of his shirt. The king caught her wrist. His grip was firm but not painful, and the heat of his skin against hers made her breath catch. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "I'm your healer. It's my job." She met his gaze without flinching. "Unless you brought me here just to drink wine and discuss your reputation." Something shifted in his expression. The hard lines of his face softened by a fraction, and his grip on her wrist loosened. He didn't release her, but he stopped resisting. After a moment, he lifted his shirt himself, exposing a torso that was lean and muscled and marred by a spreading bruise across his ribs. The skin had already turned an ugly purple, and Alara could tell from the swelling that at least one rib was cracked. "This is not nothing," she said firmly. "This needs treatment. Why didn't you call one of the palace healers?" "Because they would ask questions." He let the shirt fall and leaned back in the chair, his eyes never leaving her face. "They would want to know how the king injured himself. They would write reports. Those reports would reach the council, and the council would use them as evidence that I am unfit to rule." Alara sat back on her heels, understanding dawning. "You don't trust them. I don't trust anyone." The words were flat, final, but then his gaze softened, just slightly. "Or I didn't." Until a girl with no power and nothing to gain stepped in front of two armed guards to protect a crippled beggar she had never met. The firelight painted shadows across his face, and Alara saw something beneath the harsh exterior. Loneliness. The kind of bone-deep isolation that came from years of watching for betrayal, waiting for the knife in the dark. She knew that feeling. She had lived with it herself, ever since her family died and left her alone in a world that saw her as worthless. "I'll get supplies," she said softly. There must be a healer's store somewhere in the palace. I can wrap your ribs, give you something for the pain. And you won't tell anyone? Who would I tell? She rose to her feet and managed a small smile. I'm the street rat, remember? No one here talks to me anyway. The king watched her for a long moment. Then, slowly, the corner of his mouth curved upward. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close, and it transformed his face, softening the sharp edges, making him look almost young. Perhaps that's exactly why I chose you, Alara Vane. Her name and his voice did something strange to her chest. She turned away before he could see the flush creeping up her cheeks and walked toward the door. I'll be back soon. Try not to die before I return. Was that an order? His voice followed her, tinged with something that might have been amusement. Consider it strong medical advice. She slipped out of the room, heart racing, and leaned against the cool stone of the corridor wall. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear. Not anymore. Something had shifted between them in that firelit room. Something that felt dangerous and warm and completely beyond her control. The Alpha King had shown her his wound, and somehow, impossibly, she had made him smile. 3 days passed, and Alara fell into a strange routine. Each morning, she rose before dawn and made her way to the palace healing stores. The head healer, an elderly wolf named Master Aldrich, had given her grudging access after she explained that the king had personally requested her services. He didn't ask questions, but his eyes were sharp with curiosity. Alara took only what she needed and left quickly, avoiding the whispers that followed her through the corridors. Each evening, she went to the king's chambers. She changed his bandages, checked his breathing, applied fresh poultices to his bruised ribs. The work was simple enough, the kind of thing she had done 100 times in the village, but nothing about being alone with Caden Blackwood felt simple. Every brush of her fingers against his skin sent electricity through her veins. Every time their eyes met, she felt something tighten in her chest, warm and unfamiliar and terrifying. On the 4th night, he asked her to stay. The bandages are done, Alara said, wiping her hands on a clean cloth. You're healing well. Another week and you won't need me anymore. Sit with me. He gestured to the chair across from his. The fire crackled between them, casting warm light across his features. Unless you have somewhere more important to be. She didn't, and they both knew it. Alara hesitated, then lowered herself into the offered chair. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like the quiet before a confession, heavy with words not yet spoken. Why do you do it? She asked finally. The disguises, walking among your people as a beggar, it's dangerous. Because it's the only way to see the truth. He stared into the flames, his expression distant. When you wear a crown, everyone lies to you. They tell you what they think you want to hear. They smile to your face and plot behind your back. But when you're nobody, when you're broken and worthless, you see who people really are. Alara thought about the market square, the guards who had beaten him without hesitation, the crowd that had looked away, and herself, stepping forward when everyone else stepped back. You were testing them, she said slowly. Testing everyone. Yes. And me? Was I a test too? He turned his head to look at her. The firelight caught his golden eyes, making them glow like molten metal. There was something raw in his expression, something she hadn't seen before. You were the only one who passed. The words hung in the air between them. Alara felt her heart skip, felt the warmth spreading through her chest. She should look away. She should say something light, something to break the tension. Instead, she found herself leaning forward, drawn to him like a moth to flame. Can I ask you something? Her voice came out softer than she intended. You can ask. I may not answer. Your brother. She saw him tense, but she pressed on. The stories say you killed him to take the throne. Is that true? For a long moment he didn't speak. His jaw tightened, and she watched the muscles in his throat work as he swallowed. When he finally answered, his voice was rough with old pain. My brother tried to kill me first. He spoke to the fire, not to her. He was the firstborn, the heir. Our father favored him in all things. But Marcus was cruel in ways our father refused to see. He hurt servants, tormented the weak. And when our father died and the crown passed to me instead of him, he couldn't bear it. Why did it pass to you? Because the wolf chooses the king, not bloodlines, not birth order. The pack's ancient magic recognized something in me that it didn't see in Marcus. His hands curled into fists on the armrests. He tried to poison me 3 times. When that failed, he came to my chambers with a knife. I had no choice. Alara's chest ached for him. She could see it now, the weight he carried, the guilt of surviving, the loneliness of being the monster in everyone's stories when he was really just a man who had defended his own life. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "that you had to do that, that everyone believes the worst of you." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw surprise flicker across his features, as if he hadn't expected compassion, as if he had forgotten what it felt like to have someone see past the crown and the reputation and the fear. "Your turn," he said quietly. "You know my secret now. Tell me yours." "I don't have secrets." "Everyone has secrets, Alara." Her name in his voice made her shiver. "You flinch whenever someone mentions shifting. You avoid the other wolves. You keep yourself apart, always watching, never belonging." His eyes held hers with unsettling intensity. "Why?" The truth sat heavy on her tongue. She had never told anyone. Not Mistress Helene. Not the few friends she had made and lost over the years. It was her shame, her weakness, the thing that made her less than everyone around her. But he had given her his truth. And somehow, in this fire-lit room with this dangerous, lonely king, she found she wanted to give him hers. "I can't shift," she said. The words came out barely above a whisper. "I've never been able to. My wolf is there. I can feel her, but she won't come out. She's trapped inside me, and I don't know why." She waited for his disgust, his dismissal, the same reaction she had gotten from everyone who had ever learned her secret. Instead, he leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "Have you always been this way?" "Since I was a child. My parents took me to every healer, every shaman, every wise woman in 3 territories. No one could fix me." Her voice cracked slightly. "They called me defective, broken. When my parents died, their pack cast me out. Said I wasn't really a wolf at all. They were wrong." The certainty in his voice made her look up. He was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch, his golden eyes burning with something that looked almost like anger on her behalf. "You are more wolf than half the wolves in my kingdom," he said. "You have more courage, more honor, more heart. The ability to shift doesn't make someone worthy. Their actions do." Tears pricked at Alara's eyes. No one had ever said anything like that to her. No one had ever looked at her broken, defective self and seen something worth defending. "Thank you," she managed. "Don't thank me for telling the truth." He rose from his chair and crossed the space between them. Before she could react, he was kneeling in front of her, his face level with hers. This close, she could see the flecks of amber in his golden eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body. "The people who hurt you were fools, and if I ever meet them, I will make them regret every cruel word they ever spoke." Her heart was pounding so hard she couldn't breathe. He was so close. His hand rose to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. The touch was gentle, impossibly gentle for a man with such a fearsome reputation. "Caden," she whispered. It was the first time she had used his name. Something flickered in his eyes. Want. Need. And underneath it all, the same fear she felt herself. The terror of letting someone close after being alone for so long. "I should go," she said, though she made no move to stand. "You should," he agreed, though his hand remained on her cheek. Neither of them moved. The fire crackled. The night pressed against the windows. And Alara realized with a certainty that shook her to her core that she was falling for the Alpha King. And from the way he was looking at her, he was falling too. A week later, the king held a feast. Alara learned about it from the servants' gossip, whispered conversations that stopped the moment she walked into a room. A celebration of the autumn harvest, they said. An excuse for the nobility to parade themselves before the crown, and apparently an opportunity for the council to present their latest candidate for queen, Lady Vivian of the Northern Reaches. Beautiful, powerful, from one of the oldest wolf bloodlines in the kingdom. Everything Ilara was not. She told herself it didn't matter. She was a healer, nothing more. Whatever had passed between her and Caden in those firelit evenings, whatever connection had grown in the quiet moments when he let his guard down, it meant nothing in the face of politics and duty. Kings didn't marry servants. They certainly didn't marry defective wolves who couldn't even shift. But telling herself these things didn't stop the ache in her chest when she saw Lady Vivian arrive. The woman was stunning. Tall and willowy, with hair like spun gold and eyes the color of a summer sky. She moved through the palace like she already owned it, her laugh ringing through the corridors, her hand resting possessively on the arm of any noble foolish enough to get close. The servants adored her, the council adored her, and from what Alara could see, she had set her sights firmly on the king. "You're staring!" Alara jumped. She had been watching from the shadows of the great hall as the feast preparations unfolded, telling herself she was just passing through. Caden stood behind her, dressed in formal black, a crown of silver resting on his dark hair. He looked every inch the king, and he was looking at her with an expression that made her stomach flip. "I wasn't staring," she lied. "I was observing. There's a difference." "Is there?" He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body through her thin dress. "And what have you observed?" "That Lady Vivian is very beautiful." The words tasted bitter on her tongue. The council chose well. Something flickered across his face. "The council chooses many things. That doesn't mean I agree with them." "She's perfect for you. Powerful. Noble. She can actually shift, unlike some people." "Ilara." His voice was soft but firm. He turned to face her fully, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "I don't want perfect. I don't want powerful or noble or any of the things the council values." He stepped closer, and she felt her back press against the cold stone wall. "I want someone who sees me, not the crown, not the monster, me." Her heart was racing. "Caden, I want someone who kneels beside my chair and tells me I'm lying about my own injuries. Someone who looks at me without fear. Someone who makes me smile when I've forgotten how." His hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his fingers trailing fire across her skin. "I want you, Alara. Only you." She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All she could do was stare at him as the words washed over her, impossible and wonderful and terrifying all at once. "I'm no one," she whispered. "I'm nothing. I can't give you heirs. I can't give you power. I can't—" "You've given me more than anyone ever has." His forehead dropped to rest against hers. She could feel his breath warm on her lips, could see the vulnerability in his golden eyes. "You've given me trust, hope, something to protect that I actually care about. The council will never accept me. Then the council can burn." She let out a startled laugh, half sob, half disbelief. "You can't just—" "I'm the Alpha King." His lips curved into that almost smile she had grown to love. I can do whatever I want. And what I want is to stop pretending I don't think about you every moment of every day. What I want is to stop watching you walk away each night when all I want is for you to stay. Alara's hands came up to rest on his chest. She could feel his heart pounding beneath her palms, as fast and wild as her own. This was madness. This was impossible. This was everything she had never dared to want. What if I'm not enough? Her voice cracked. What if you wake up one day and realize you made a mistake? Then I'll spend every day after that convincing you otherwise. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. But I won't. I know it like I know my own name. You're my mate, Alara. I felt the bond since the moment you stepped in front of those guards. My wolf has known it from the start. Mate. The word echoed through her like a bell, resonating somewhere deep inside her chest where her wolf lay sleeping. She felt a flutter there, something stirring that had been still her entire life. "Kiss me," she breathed. He didn't hesitate. His mouth found hers, warm and desperate and achingly gentle. She gasped against his lips, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. He tasted like wine and wanting, and when his arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her against him, she felt something inside her finally click into place. This was where she belonged. Not in the shadows. Not in the servants' quarters. Here, in the arms of a king who saw her as no one ever had. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers once more. "Stay with me tonight," he murmured. "Yes," she whispered back. "Yes." And for the first time in her life, Alara felt like she had finally come home. The happiness lasted 3 days, 3 perfect days of stolen glances across crowded rooms, of his hand finding hers beneath the table during council meetings she was never supposed to attend, of quiet nights in his chambers where they talked until dawn, learning each other's hopes and fears and dreams. Alara had never known such joy existed. She had spent so long surviving that she had forgotten what it felt like to truly live. But the palace had eyes everywhere, and not all of them were friendly. On the 4th morning, Alara woke to find a note slipped under her door. The paper was expensive, cream-colored with a golden seal she didn't recognize. The message inside was brief and devastating. "Meet me in the Eastern Garden at noon. Come alone. There is something you need to see regarding your precious king. A friend." Her first instinct was to ignore it, to crumple the paper and throw it in the fire and pretend it had never existed. But doubt crept in like poison, whispering questions she didn't want to ask. What if there was something she didn't know? What if Caden was hiding something? What if this fragile happiness was built on lies? She told herself she was being foolish. She told herself that trust meant believing in someone even when the shadows whispered otherwise. But by the time noon arrived, her feet had carried her to the Eastern Garden without her permission. Lady Vivian was waiting. She stood beneath an arbor of climbing roses, her golden hair gleaming in the sunlight, her smile as sharp as a blade. She was alone, but Alara had the distinct feeling that they were being watched. "You came," Lady Vivian said. "How wonderfully predictable." Alara's hands curled into fists at her sides. "What do you want?" "To help you, of course." The lady's voice dripped with false sweetness. "You're clearly in over your head, little healer. The king has a habit of collecting broken things, but he always throws them away eventually. I thought you deserved to know the truth before he discards you like all the others." There were no others. Weren't there? Lady Vivian reached into her sleeve and withdrew a folded piece of parchment. Before you, there was a seamstress. Before her, a kitchen maid. Before her, a stable hand's daughter. All of them plucked from obscurity, showered with attention, and then cast aside when he grew bored. She held out the paper. Letters from the seamstress. She documented everything, including the day he told her she was his mate, just before he had her thrown out of the palace. Alara's blood went cold. She didn't want to take the paper, didn't want to read it. But her hands moved of their own accord, unfolding the parchment with trembling fingers. The handwriting was feminine and desperate. It spoke of love and betrayal, of promises broken and hearts shattered. It described private moments that sounded achingly familiar. The firelit conversations, the whispered confessions, the way he made her feel like she was the only person in the world, right up until the moment he made her feel like nothing at all. "This could be forged," Alara said, but her voice shook. "It could be." Lady Vivian's smile widened. "But is it? Ask yourself, little healer, why would a king truly want someone like you? You can't shift. You can't give him heirs. You have nothing to offer but a pretty face and a bleeding heart." She leaned closer, her perfume cloying and sweet. "He's using you, just like he used all the others, and when he's finished, he'll marry me, because that's what kings do. They take what they want, and then they do their duty." Alara wanted to argue, wanted to throw the letter back in Vivian's face and storm away, but the words wouldn't come. All she could see was the seamstress's handwriting, so full of pain. All she could hear was Caden's voice in her memory, saying the same words he had apparently said to countless others. "You're my mate. My wolf has known it from the start. Had it all been a lie? I see you're beginning to understand." Lady Vivian plucked the letter from Alara's numb fingers. "Don't feel too badly. You're not the first fool to fall for his act, and you won't be the last. But if you have any sense of self-preservation, you'll leave the palace tonight, before he has the chance to destroy you completely." She swept away in a rustle of silk, leaving Alara alone among the roses. The garden blurred through tears she refused to let fall. Her chest ached with a pain so deep she could barely breathe. She wanted to believe it was all lies, wanted to trust in the connection she had felt, the bond that had seemed so real. But doubt had taken root, and doubt, once planted, was almost impossible to kill. That night, when a servant came to summon her to the king's chambers, Alara sent her away. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, and tried to convince herself that she was being smart, cautious, protecting herself before she could be hurt any worse. But all she felt was the cold emptiness of a heart beginning to break. He came to her the next morning. Alara had barely slept. She sat on the edge of her bed, still in yesterday's dress, her eyes red and swollen from tears. She had finally allowed herself to cry. When the knock came, she knew who it was before she opened the door. She could feel him on the other side, a presence that called to something deep inside her chest. The bond, or whatever cruel trick her heart was playing on her. Caden stood in the corridor, and he looked almost as wrecked as she felt. Dark circles shadowed his golden eyes, and his hair was disheveled, as if he had been running his hands through it all night. He was still wearing the clothes from yesterday's council meeting, wrinkled now and unbuttoned at the collar. "You didn't come," he said. His voice was rough. "I waited all night. I sent 3 messengers. What happened?" Alara gripped the doorframe to keep herself steady. "I can't do this anymore." "Can't do what?" He stepped forward and she stepped back. Pain flashed across his face at the rejection. "Alara, talk to me. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. Just tell me what happened." "How many others were there?" The words burst out of her like a dam breaking. "Before me. How many other broken girls did you pluck from the streets and make feel special? How many of them did you tell they were your mate?" He went still. Completely, utterly still, the way he had been in the market square when he was pretending to be someone else. But this time there was no pretense, only shock. And beneath it, a growing horror. "What are you talking about?" The seamstress, the kitchen maid, the stable hand's daughter. Each name felt like a knife in her own chest. "Lady Vivian told me everything. She showed me letters, Proof that you've done this before, over and over, collecting damaged women and throwing them away when you get bored. Vivian. His voice went cold and hard. She came to you with this. She showed me letters, Caden, written by a woman who loved you, who trusted you, who you destroyed. Those letters are forgeries. He reached for her, and she flinched away. His hand dropped to his side, and she watched something shatter behind his eyes. Elara, I have never. There was no seamstress, no kitchen maid, no one. Vivian is lying. She's been trying to get me to accept her as queen for months. She would do anything to drive you away. And I should just believe you? Her voice cracked. I should just trust that the king who tests everyone, who trusts no one, who admits to wearing masks and playing games, is telling me the truth now? Yes. The word was simple and fierce. Because you know me, you've seen me, the real me, not the masks, not the games. Everything I told you was true. Every moment we shared was real. She wanted to believe him. The mate bond, or whatever it was, screamed at her to believe him, to fall into his arms and let him hold her until the doubt melted away. But the old wounds were too deep. The years of being cast aside, of being told she was worthless, of being abandoned by everyone who had ever claimed to care. They had built walls that even a king couldn't breach. I can't trust you, she whispered. I can't trust anyone. I don't know how. Then let me teach you. He stepped closer, and this time she didn't move away. His hand came up to cup her face, and she felt the warmth of his palm against her cold cheek. Let me spend every day proving that I'm worthy of your trust. I'll wait as long as it takes. For one heartbreaking moment, she almost gave in, almost let herself fall. But then Lady Vivian's words echoed through her mind. He's using you, just like he used all the others. And she pulled away. I can't. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm sorry, Caden. I can't be what you need. I can't be anyone's queen. I can barely be anyone's anything. Elara, please go. She stepped back into her room, her hand on the door. Please, before I break completely. She saw the moment he decided to respect her wishes, saw the way his shoulders dropped, the way his golden eyes dimmed with a grief that mirrored her own. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. When he finally turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor, Elara felt the bond between them stretch thin. She closed the door. She sank to the floor, and she wept. In his chambers, alone among his books and maps and memories of her, Caden Blackwood sat in the chair where she had first tended his wounds. He stared into the dying fire and felt something inside him go cold and dark. He had found his mate, and he had lost her. And somewhere in the palace, Lady Vivian smiled. 2 days later, the truth came to light. Elara was packing her meager belongings when the freckled servant girl burst through her door without knocking. The girl's face was flushed, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. You have to come, she gasped. The Great Hall. Right now. Lady Vivian, the king is, please, just come. Alara's heart seized. She didn't want to go. Didn't want to see Caden again. Didn't want to feel the pull of the bond that still ached inside her chest despite everything. But the girl's panic was real, and something deeper than reason drove Elara to follow her through the winding corridors toward the noise of raised voices. The great hall was in chaos. Nobles lined the walls, whispering behind their hands. Guards stood at attention, their faces tense. And in the center of the room, Lady Vivian knelt on the cold stone floor, her golden hair disheveled, her beautiful face twisted with rage. Caden stood over her, and he had never looked more like the monster of the stories. His wolf was close to the surface, his eyes blazing gold, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of an alpha in his full power. You conspired against your king, he said, and his voice echoed off the walls. You forged documents. You manipulated an innocent woman. You attempted to deceive the crown into a marriage built on lies. I did it for the kingdom. Vivian's voice was shrill. For the bloodline. That defective little nobody could never give you heirs, could never rule at your side. I was saving you from your own foolish heart. You were saving yourself. Caden held up a sheaf of papers, and Alara recognized the cream-colored stationery with the golden seal. These letters you showed my mate were written by your own hand. My investigators found the original drafts in your chambers, along with correspondence with my enemies in the northern reaches. You weren't just trying to steal my throne. You were planning to hand my kingdom to your family. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Alara felt the blood drain from her face as the full weight of Vivian's betrayal crashed over her. The letters had been fake. All of it had been fake. And she had believed every word. Take her to the dungeons, Caden commanded. Guards stepped forward to drag Vivian away, and she screamed curses as she went, her perfect facade shattered completely. But Caden wasn't watching her. His eyes had found Alara across the crowded hall, and the anger in them melted into something raw and desperate. The crowd parted as he walked toward her. Alara couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only watch as the Alpha King crossed the distance between them and sank to his knees at her feet. A collective gasp echoed through the hall. Kings did not kneel. Not to anyone. Not ever. I should have protected you from her lies, Caden said, his voice rough with emotion. I should have seen what she was planning. I should have fought harder to make you believe me. Caden, get up. Alara's voice trembled. Everyone is watching. You can't. I don't care who watches. He caught her hands in his, and she felt the warmth of his skin, the slight tremor that told her he was just as terrified as she was. I would kneel before the entire kingdom if it meant you would look at me again. I would burn my crown to ash if it meant you would trust me. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. I should have trusted what we had instead of letting her poison everything. You were afraid. His thumb traced circles on her palm. You've been hurt so many times. How could you not be afraid? I was a coward. You were human. He rose to his feet, still holding her hands, his golden eyes soft with a tenderness that made her chest ache. And I love you anyway. I love your fear and your courage and your stubborn, wounded heart. I love everything you are, Alara Vane. I always will. The words hit her like sunlight after a storm. She felt something crack inside her, some final wall crumbling to dust, and beneath the rubble, something stirred, something that had been sleeping her entire life. Her wolf. I love you too, she breathed. I think I've loved you since you stood up in that market square and turned out to be a king instead of a beggar. He laughed, a sound of pure joy and relief, and then his arms were around her, and his mouth was on hers, and nothing else mattered. The crowd erupted into whispers and gasps, but Alara heard none of it. All she knew was the warmth of him, the rightness of being in his arms, the bond between them blazing to life like a fire that had finally found its fuel. When they broke apart, Caden pressed his forehead to hers. Stay with me, he murmured, not just tonight, forever. Be my queen, be my mate, be mine. Yes, she whispered. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. And deep inside her chest, her wolf howled with joy. The wedding took place on the first day of winter. Snow fell softly over the palace grounds as Alara walked through the great hall, her hand resting on the arm of Commander Graves, who had grudgingly agreed to escort her in the absence of any living family. The same nobles who had once looked through her now bowed their heads in respect. The same servants who had whispered behind her back now smiled with genuine warmth. Everything had changed. And yet, as Alara's eyes found Caden waiting at the altar, she knew that the only thing that truly mattered had stayed exactly the same. He loved her. She loved him, and that was enough. Caden watched her approach with an expression of such open adoration that Alara felt tears prick at her eyes. He was dressed in ceremonial black, a silver crown resting on his dark hair, every inch the Alpha King. But when she reached him and took his hands, she saw only the man who had knelt before her in a crowded hall, the man who had shown her his wounds and trusted her with his secrets, the man who had looked at her broken, defective self and seen something worth loving. "You're beautiful," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "You're biased," she whispered back. "Completely." His lips curved into that almost smile she had grown to love. "And I intend to stay that way for the rest of our lives." The ceremony passed in a blur of vows and blessings. When the officiant pronounced them mated and married, Caden kissed her so thoroughly that the crowd erupted into cheers and laughter. Alara laughed against his lips, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The celebration lasted well into the night. There was feasting and dancing and more joy than Alara had ever experienced in her life. But as the moon rose high over the palace, Caden took her hand and led her away from the noise, through the corridors she now knew by heart, out into the snow-covered gardens where the world was quiet and still. "I have something for you," he said. "You've already given me everything." Not quite. He turned to face her, and in the moonlight his golden eyes seemed to glow. "Close your eyes." She obeyed, feeling the cold kiss of snowflakes on her cheeks. His hands found hers, warm and steady, and she felt the bond between them pulse with something new, something ancient and powerful and wild. "Now," he said softly, "feel it. Your wolf. She's been waiting for this, waiting for you to feel safe enough to let her free." Alara reached inward, toward the place where her wolf had always slumbered, caged behind walls of fear and shame and rejection. But the walls were gone now. Caden's love had burned them away, and in their place, she found something beautiful, something whole. The shift came like breathing. One moment she was standing on 2 legs, and the next she was on 4, her paws sinking into the fresh snow, her senses exploding with scent and sound and sensation. She was smaller than most wolves, her fur the color of moonlight, but she was finally, gloriously complete. A massive black wolf stood beside her, Caden. His golden eyes met hers, and she felt his joy through the bond, as bright and warm as the sun. They ran together through the frozen gardens, 2 wolves beneath a winter moon. And Alara knew, with a certainty that sang through every fiber of her being, that she would never be alone again. Later, curled together in their chambers, human once more, Caden pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I knew you had it in you," he murmured against her hair, "from the very first moment." "You saw me," she whispered, "when no one else did." "I always will." Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, the fire crackled warm and bright. And in the heart of the palace, the Alpha King held his queen close and thanked the fates for the girl who had saved a beggar in a market square. The girl who had turned out to be everything he never knew he needed. The end.